You may wonder, I mean, I used to always wonder, why is the king picking on this poor schmo who wasn't planning on being at a banquet with the king when he was wandering around outside? You know, like somebody stopping you on the way into Walmart or the Safeway and saying, hey, the president's here, come on in, you know, and you're going like, but I'm dressed in flip-flops and, you know, or however you're dressed. You know, it wouldn't be the way you were expecting to be dressed if you were going to the White House, I suppose. Or maybe it would be, who knows? Remember one time they had people were invited to the White House. I forget when, but I think they just came as they were and wore baseball caps because they said, you know, he's no different than any of us are. And it's sort of like, well, okay, yeah, but that's not the point. The point is showing respect. The point is showing respect. So this is what's happening with this gospel. But here's what we need to know. If you're my age or older, you might remember that there was a time where if you went into a fancy restaurant, that you had to have a tie and blazer. And sometimes it was just a tie, you know, but it was both, you know, because they didn't want to lose, you know, your custom, you know, you're being a customer, they would say, no worries, sir, we have a blazer right here. It's orange, pink, and green, and it glows in the dark. You're welcome to wear it and with a tie, you know, and we hope you enjoy your meal. And then they provided something for you. Well, that's how it was in the days when banquets were given and everyone was invited. It was a sign, a wedding, for instance, or a feast was a sign of joy and celebration, and the poor were invited. And now here you have it where the king's inviting all the regular people, and they're too busy to be involved. And so he's very upset with them, to say the least. But he calls all the ordinary people. He says, come on in, come on in. Tell them to come in, make them come in. I want my house to be full. I prepared this feast, everything is ready. And so the kingdom of heaven, which is what the feast of the king is supposed to embody, you know, is meant, what is it that God is preparing for you and for me? And do we actually attire ourselves in the way that is appropriate for us to enter where we show our respect for God? And what happened is, just like the restaurants that would have blazers and ties available in the cloakroom, there would be different sized robes that would be hanging in the vestibule of the entrance into the feasting hall, where the poor would be able to borrow something appropriate to wear. And so what happens is, everybody's there, most people are happy to be there, and everyone has put on gladly a wedding garment so they can then participate in the feast. And there's one guy there who couldn't even bother himself to put the thing on. And that's why the king says, friend, I imagine that's what he said, friend, how'd you happen to come in here without doing the least that was required of you? So what this says to us is, do we expect to get into heaven without showing our proper respect for God and his law? Just as the king gives the wedding garments, God gives the law. Law is two things. Love God with all your stuff and love your neighbor like you love yourself. That's it. Do this and you will live, he told the young man one time who was asking, you know, what do I need to have eternal life? And because he said, love your neighbor, he said, well, who is my neighbor? You know, was everybody my neighbor? And of course, you remember that the good Lord said that story about the man who was beset by robbers coming down from Jerusalem to Jericho. And it said, which one was neighbor to the man? After the priest went by and the Levite went by. And the reason why the priest and Levite went by is because they were on their way to the temple to offer service and sacrifice. But if they touched somebody who was bloody or dead, they would become ritually impure and were unable to then take what was their role in life. You know, but the reality was the person who treated them with compassion, you know, became neighbor to the man, and compassion is part of the summation of the whole law. Summation of the whole law. Can you imagine if you were reading in the paper today that there was some accident somewhere and people were on the street and they were bleeding and they're bloody, and people went by and didn't do anything? You don't have to imagine that happens. Do you ever read about the people that are stabbed, or there's a fight going on, and instead of anybody interfering, some people are filming it? That happens. Can you imagine if the story was that there was a priest who was going by and didn't stop to help? What would you think of that? Say, that's no priest. Or you could at least say, that's no Christian. Or you might say, that person might know the prayers and know the law and know the gospel, but he's not embodying it. St. Paul said, what good is it to have faith without actions? Faith without actions is like a body without breath. It's dead. And so this is what this little gospel passage is talking about. Now, how do we put on that wedding garment? How do we put on that cloth, that attire, that helps us to show respect for the King who calls us to his wedding feast or his banquet? And it's putting on the two main precepts of the law. Love God, all your heart, all your mind, all your soul, all your strength. In other words, don't hold anything back. And love your neighbor like you love yourself. That takes care of everything. And so how do we do that? And you might say that if we abide by those commandments, we then have put on righteousness. We've clothed ourselves with the armor of compassion and justice. And how are we going to do that, being human beings? You remember one time, the old joke, old joke. By the way, how many remember Henny Youngman? Henny Youngman? Remember he would always do things like this, He'd go like, he played the violin and they would stop in a minute and go, take my wife, please. Well, it was funny then, it's not funny now, but got to remember it was the 50s. But there was a man who said, a man stopped me and said, excuse me, sir, how do I get to Carnegie Hall? Practice, my boy, practice. I didn't expect that one would land like a dud, too. So how do you become a righteous person? Practice. And how do you enable yourself to begin to practice it? Prayer. And here's where we sometimes go wrong. Long ago, I learned that there were 4 basic kinds of prayer. Adoration, God is so good. Contrition, I'm so bad. Thanksgiving, thank you so much. And supplication, I need this. Now, the reality is most of us spend our time with the, I'm so bad and I need this, if we're honest. And there's contemplative prayer, meditative prayer, which helps us to meditate on the existence of God and his love for us and what he asks of us. And so I'm going to share from Renee Duggan, who's from the ministry Spirit and Truth. She says, more than these things, the simple act of praying, as well as the habit of being steady in prayer, can have a fantastic impact on a person's life. And she said, there's a quote I love in this regard. Once a man was asked, what did you gain by regularly praying to God? The man replied, nothing. But let me tell you what I lost. Anger, ego, greed, depression, insecurity, and fear of death. Sometimes the answer to our prayers is not gaining, but losing, which ultimately is the gain. She says, what a powerful perspective. Prayer can be life-changing because even if we don't see divine providence spring from it, the mere act of prayer itself lifts up our mind and heart to God, and we begin to see things his way. With open ears and an open heart, we may even be receptive to an answer that is not quite what we asked for, yet is everything we needed to amplify and improve our spiritual walk and move into a deeper relationship with God who made us. Remember, there was a rock song in the 60s or 70s, remember it? It was, sometimes you don't get what you want, but if you try sometimes, you just might get what you need. And that's how prayer works. It's not a question of us telling God what he's supposed to give to us. It's us approaching God and saying, tell us how we can give to you. And that is the goal of the Christian life. The act of prayer, this is Renee Duggan again, says, as the opportunity to change any individual who is asking with a humble heart, as opposed to an attitude of simply demand, receive, depart. And lots of times, and my prayer life is that way, I regularly think about praying seriously when something, I pray casually, I pray formally, I pray regularly, but I don't always pray intently until something has hit the fan. Something has really gone wrong. And then I am on my knees before God. Lots of times I'm praying for somebody else, but most of the time it's still the same thing, even if I'm praying for myself. I need this, we need this, they need this. You need to give this. Someone once said that prayer is really trying to join ourselves to God's will, to move ourselves to put on that wedding garment. In which case, when it's raining, you don't say things like, oh God, please make it stop raining. I was going to play golf today, you know? It really should be, God, thank you for the rain. You know, help me to appreciate all that you have given in this beautiful world. And since I have to go out into it, help me be safe and cautious and careful. And the very fact of having that kind of conversation means you've already said to yourself what you need to do, how you need to change. I better be careful. I better be cautious. I better be wise. It would seem to me, from taking a look at the way people drive in traffic today, that no one is praying.